everybody, and welcome to the show on your favorite Tuesday, wherever you are on that lovely planet. A warm welcome, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today, I'm thrilled because pricing has always been a topic which is challenging. Get the price right. And even a quiz show I know from the US, The Price is Right, which was one of my favorites when I was still a young chap, 14, 15, 16, like that, centuries ago. That was
Millennia.
yeah, you're right. Thomas, you're right. But interesting is to take this from a quiz show and from the gaming perspective to a very serious matter, such as what is a good price? What is a fair price? What is a perspective, and how can one get solid foundation on justifying that this is a true price? We have this in governmental environments, we have this as private persons when we purchase, and as economies or business entities. Now, welcome with me, John Bruno from Preis, and it's fantastic to have you with us. Hi.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. The pleasure is ours, and I would like to be curious as always, as it is one of my favorite roles, being curious. Can you tell us a bit about your career, what you have done before, and what Preis is doing? And probably you share not only the place where you live, such as in which part of the country, but also some other private stuff.
Sure. So my name is John Bruno. I am Vice President of Strategy at Preis, as you could probably see. There we go, right behind me. Preis has been a leader in the revenue management, price optimization management, and configure and price quote spaces for years. So we started 30 plus years ago, actually helping airlines like Southwest Airlines manage their revenue management processes. And over those years, we have come to price a vast majority of the world's airfare. So you might not be familiar with us, but odds are, if you booked a flight from anywhere in the world to anywhere in the world, it's probably been priced using Preis technologies. And over the years, we have taken that pedigree and that experience and translated that for B2B businesses. And so I've been at Preis in the role of Vice President of Strategy for the past 2 years, but I like to consider myself a friend of the family. I've been working in various capacities with Preis, actually going back to 2014. And over the last 15 or so years, I've dabbled in various aspects of really all enterprise software. So prior to my role at Preis, I spent a few years as the head of product for ElasticPath, which is a leader in the headless e-commerce space. Before that, where I think most of you probably know me from, is my time at Forrester Research. I spent 5 years at Forrester Research, responsible for the areas of Salesforce automation, of configure price quote, and pricing, and eventually moved on to lead their e-commerce research practice. And before that, I dabbled around, spent time at Pegasystems and a couple of other software companies along the way. I live now or actually just outside of Boston, Massachusetts with my wife. She and I are expecting our first child in a few weeks, as I was telling Thomas earlier. So that's probably the most fun fact about me right now.
Yeah, it'll be a life-changing event.
Absolutely.
A long-term project.
Yes, and a fascinating one. Trust me, I have 3 boys. He has girls, also 3. I'm right. And
And I have regrets.
Well, at least you are the boss in your own house.
True.
But out of curiosity, John,
yeah,
as we all are once in a while affected by airlines, as we want to go into vacation or just do a plain old business trip, I heard a rumor that airlines are sometimes doing their pricing based on the machine that you use for booking it. So, or in plain words, if you're a Mac user, you pay premium. Is that true? Are they really doing that kind of stuff?
Every business is a little bit different. I would say if
Yeah.
that's what airlines are doing, they're largely unsophisticated. More commonly, you're looking at things like what's the origin, what's the destination, at what time of the year, what other events are happening. Of course, there's demand signals. And what's really unique about airlines and transportation in general is that any particular airline or any particular plane, bus, boat has a finite capacity. And so they're constantly looking at things like capacity, they're looking at available fare classes, they're looking at loyalty statuses and really everything in between in, time and duration when booking. And so there's a slew of data that all gets folded into how an airline generates and delivers the right price point. But because all of those factors change so regularly, it has to be dynamic and everything needs to be delivered in real time, which is why you might see one price on a Tuesday night versus a Wednesday morning. It's less to do around, what browser, what device, are you biasing towards Mac or Windows or things like that.
Are there also strategies that follow a pattern, like if you look at it 2 times, the 3rd time the price is different? Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's certainly other signals that can get folded in as well. So one of the things that we actually did last year is we had acquired a company based out of Miami called Everymundo. And we like to talk about them in terms of digital fare marketing. And so similar to B2B and B2C worlds, you have more brands looking to own more of the experience. And quite frankly, over the last 10 to 15 years or so, a lot of airlines have lost a lot of the user experience to online travel agencies, meta search engines, Kayak, and Orbitz, and others, where airline.com would love to have that. And so what Everymundo does is it allows airlines to promote different fares and trips on their own digital properties, so their own airline.com, but also elsewhere, and generate ads and do search engine management and SEO so that they draw more travelers back into their own experience. And so with all those data signals, certainly airlines can start to tune and understand buyer sentiment and likelihood of purchase to inform some of their pricing strategies as well.
For taking that chain again up, as my family has relatives in Costa Rica, travels a lot after some normalization in COVID. And what would be your advice to outsmart the search engines dedicated for best prices? Would you always refresh a browser, use different browsers for certain searches, or what is some of the guidance you would give us for free?
Spilling the beans here.
Well, I would say we've been in this space for a long time, right? And so we've developed AI models and algorithms all over those years. So can you outsmart it? I don't know that you necessarily can. And because there's so much more data, folded in there, if folks are traveling to Costa Rica frequently, a lot of that's going to be based on who else is going, what time of the year they're going, what days of the week they're traveling, and things of that nature. So there's a lot more than just one individual's behavior in terms of price setting. So in years past, it may have been kind of geared more towards the individual, but now we're looking at different trends. And obviously airlines have different motivations as well. Maybe they want to drive, profitability per seat. Maybe for them, it's about, filling the remaining seats on a flight so that, there aren't, 20% empty seats, things of that nature. So it can all fluctuate, and there are probably bigger patterns than just what one individual or what family is purchasing.
Thanks for that hint. And well, no better way to outsmart the technology than just try again.
Well, you can try again, but it seems the airline industry will find something new that they can monetize. The idea of charging different amounts for different seats and different kinds of seats was, I don't think, something that happened, say, 20 years ago, for example.
Yeah, and the change didn't happen overnight. And now, you see you can't paint the airline industry with one broad brush anymore either. There are your premium carriers, there are low-cost carriers, there are ultra-low-cost carriers, and sometimes even the fees start to get broken down or amongst different services. So maybe you're paying for the seat, maybe you're paying for extra legroom, maybe you're prepaying for a meal or for Wi-Fi. Maybe they've removed the complimentary carry-on luggage or checked luggage, things like that. And so, you find ways to monetize the service that you offer, and each airline's a little bit different in kind of the part of the market they operate in.
So
Yeah.
did you know that we were going to be talking entirely about air travel today, or is this just right?
When folks learn that we are the smarts behind a vast majority of the world's airfare, it usually goes this direction.
Oh, so yours is the throat to choke.
I promise I will touch other areas as well, as I found it most thrilling, and in the opportunity we have to have you at the former colleague board, as that was the ringing the bell. Where did I know the face from? The Forrester hint and link, that was very useful. John, going from pricing and pricing portals, we have in Germany the founder, Professor Simon, who is founder of Simon Kucher and Partners, and they are internationally working. And he was in Germany one of the consultancy professionals who started giving advice on pricing. How is the consultancy business these days outsmarted or taken away by some platform or machine intelligence?
I would say it isn't, actually.
Good.
So we partner with companies like that. We partner specifically with Simon Kucher and others. And what's really interesting is that if you go back to the very earliest days of buying and selling or bartering even, price or value has been a component all along. Yet here we are, well into the this century. It's now 2022, and vast majority of organizations aren't terribly sophisticated with regards to how they think about pricing. And so, there's a very, very strong component around kind of the business acumen and kind of the levers that one can pull on when defining their pricing strategies. And that's heavily, outside and agnostic of technology. That being said, if you have those fundamentals beneath you and you've thought about your business, how you go to market and how you price your products and services, it's software like Pros that can really take that and extend it, allowing businesses to make smarter decisions and make smarter decisions more quickly so that they can stay really in lockstep with the changes that are going on in their markets and the broader macroeconomic environment.
Yeah. Pricing is something that I have always been very curious about, but never particularly handy with. The interplay between charging what you think is a fair price versus charging what the market will bear, because that is the best thing to earn money for yourself, your company, your shareholders, and all of the things that go into it just makes my head buzz.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've had 2 early exposures to pricing in kind of this context, one of which I didn't mention around kind of the personal side of things is when I was a child, my father actually owned his own distribution business in the Northeast. And so he was a distributor of paper products, largely for the restaurant industry. So think about things like takeout containers or parchment paper or plastic cutlery and things of that nature. And he had a wide variety of customers, all operating in a B2B capacity. And so much of that pricing was specific to those individual customers or determined by contracts based on volume commitment and things of that nature. And I had kind of taken for granted the firsthand exposure to that and learnings, from his business. And then I found myself in university, and one of the classes that I had taken was really the philosophy of economics and looking at things like business ethics from Aristotle and, what is fair. And there's a lot of talk around, willingness to pay and, how to treat people and broader markets when there are few competitors in place and things of that nature. So it's always been incredibly fascinating.
Yeah. Now that we have touched it, what is fair? I mean, there are military statements that basically say fair is when the other generals guys die. So how is that in pricing?
Yeah, well, we look at fairness with regards to willingness to pay, right? And so obviously, there's kind of this intersection point where at a certain price, your customers are going to walk away, and at a certain price, you're going to be leaving money on the table. So the goal there is to kind of strike that healthy balance, and that healthy balance, what we've learned more so in recent years is it's kind of a healthy balance on an individual basis. So, any given business is selling to a number of different customers, and they're going to be pretty diverse. Diverse in
Yeah.
terms of where they're located, diverse in terms of the industry in which they play in, diverse in terms of how they'll utilize those products, or diverse in terms of, even the role they play in the value chain. Are they an end consumer? Are they a manufacturer? Are they a distributor in the middle of that entire value chain? And how they think about value for each of the products and services you offer can be very different. And so when you think about doing that and doing that at scale, really the only way to help businesses approximate or get very close to that willingness to pay is to look at the various different data signals and attributes and use science and machine learning to help arrive at that price point.
How
Coming
about
on that.
ability to pay? It's not always willingness. Sometimes it's the willingness, the ability as well.
Sure. And there's a lot that goes into that as well. So let's say, for instance, you land on an agreement where a particular customer is going to pay a price of X for 10,000 widgets, right? That price of X might be X because they've agreed to pay at time of delivery. It might be Y if they agree to pay on net 30 terms. And it might be Z if they agree to pay on net 60. So there's other factors that kind of go into these kinds of commercial relationships, not just the price point, but what the business is willing to do in order to extend support for their customers.
I was looking into the pricing, for instance, of sugar, cacao, coffee, such as if they are paying a price which is calculating environmental friendly, let's say, growing of the plants and paying a fair amount for the earned coffee, for instance. How does your organization support that as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we do a fair amount of work specifically in kind of the spaces of food and consumables, but we've also seen it a lot in packaging. And actually, just more broadly than that, the notion of sustainability has become a really, really, really pervasive trend all across the globe. And some buyers are willing to pay a premium to know that their products were sustainably produced. And other times, sometimes the manufacturing process of those products is more complicated to do so. In the case of, let's say, we work with a European company that makes sustainable packaging products for the food industry, right? And so based on all of those customer attributes, yeah, you might very well see a premium because people have greater demand for sustainably produced products.
And are you serving, for instance, such price portals as Geizhals in Austria or Idealo or Check24?
Well, it's interesting. So what we see is there's, I guess to take a step back, the consumer part of the world has matured significantly in terms of transparency. The B2B portion of the market is getting there and things are more transparent, but there's still a ways to go. So if you rewind the clock back even 20 years ago, e-commerce started to become very well mainstream. When we passed the ages of dial-up internet into broadband, e-commerce became incredibly pervasive. And part of e-commerce is having your price on a website. And so I think none have done or have had a greater impact on the market than Amazon.com. But with the rise of more transparency, you see these third-party services or sites that will handle price comparisons for you. You look up a product, they tell you the price at Amazon versus Best Buy versus Target or any other retailer that you might go to. And plenty of them have gotten pretty sophisticated in terms of how they store and cache data as well, and can show you trend lines over time and how that price has fluctuated, when it's gone up, when it's gone down, what the high point has been, what the low point has been. And it's put a lot more power into the hands of the consumer. Now, if
Yeah.
you kind of draw the analog to the B2B world, well, many B2B organizations still have not opened up, their product catalogs and their e-commerce sites to the general public. In many situations, in many dynamics, you have to be in an authorized account to purchase from that vendor, that manufacturer or distributor, in which case you're largely going through a process to determine your individual price points, or you're paying, more than everyone else until you established a credible track record of purchasing from said vendor. Now, I believe the B2B market will evolve in such a way where, being fully transparent becomes the norm. But what's really interesting is it's a lot harder of a problem to solve. I look at, take a retailer like Sephora, for instance, in the beauty and cosmetic space. They carry about 35,000 products, which is, given the size of the footprint of their physical stores, that's a lot of products.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about them is they price all those products the same for every customer. Sure, there's loyalty programs and promotions and things like that, but the price is the price is the price. And so
Okay.
even with that many products, there's 35,000 price points. And if you compare and contrast that to, say, like a modest B2B distributor, who might have 20,000 customers, maybe they're trying to drive more traffic to their commerce site than traditional sales to lower the cost to serve, when you start looking at all of the various permutations, it's very easily pushing the number of price points upwards of 2 billion. And so for B2B businesses to manage all of this, it's a problem of entirely different scale.
We got a very smart question here of a very smart guy, professor for logistics, by the way. So, how are those cross effects? Do you have any insight into that?
So I'm seeing, how do business-oriented social media groups affect B2B understanding of price? Maybe I'm a little lost on what's meant by business-oriented social media groups.
LinkedIn is a business-oriented social media group, for example.
So how does,
So Stephen,
you
might elaborate on it a little bit. So people talk.
Sure.
Yeah, and how I would probably frame the question is based upon what a competitor of yours basically says and does. So what they came along with a year ago or something, so they said the ones who are selling have the leverage on the price. They have the monopoly on the price. They think. In reality, it's the buyers, because they talk to several companies. So they talk to vendor A, B, C, D, get a quote from them, means they have the pricing power. And then they talk amongst each others. So is there any way to influence that, to use that for price building, apart from reactively?
I would say it depends. And, as being a former analyst, you probably get the "it depends" answer quite a bit. But I would say it really depends on the kind of market that you're in. And actually, what I find to be more powerful than, LinkedIn's and social media is, the prevalence now of marketplaces, specifically in B2B. So one, company I've got a lot of respect for is the company Miracle, right? They power marketplaces, whether you're on the distribution side or the manufacturing side. And increasingly what's happening is, markets where you are selling, commodity products or consumables, well, that the pricing power is very, very, very quickly shifting into the hands of the buyer. Now, if you compare and contrast that to, say, a more specialized industry, take medical devices, for instance, you've got some pretty prominent names out there, and there are plenty of customers who will pay a premium to get a product that serves the same function because, maybe the brand is more reputable, maybe they deliver a higher quality of service in terms of installation or things of that nature. So it certainly depends, but I would say on the spectrum from commoditized to specialized, it's more of the transparency, social media groups being one part of it, but the transparency is very, very quickly and abruptly moving the power in that buyer-selling dynamic into the hands of the buyer.
And it's interesting that you mentioned medical and healthcare stuff, as pharmaceutical pricing is quite a challenging topic in generic cars and pioneer products such as interferon, and at the early phases of 2-3 vaccines for COVID, this has been quite a price battle for those which are going to get their supplies. Taking back from Stephen that part, I think that some of the industry-driven former special interest groups, for instance, in Germany, in one of the leftover German social networks, Xing, they are so smart that one of their added values are closed down by themselves. So there is no worries for the vendors that there is any traffic coming from that end, because they are stupid enough to close down one of the benefits. I honestly believe that what Stephen is bringing to the table is quite an interesting perspective if users as buyers are getting themselves organized and try to inform themselves, not only that there is a special bargain, such as I inform you that at the discount store that and that product or Amazon is having a very special offer, but for industry-focused topics, software services, and that for instance, within the partnerships of a vendor like Microsoft, Salesforce, SAP, one of those are having a price attack or that they deliver better. That could be a very valuable information in a software's user group. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Like discussing this. Yeah. So there's
one other interesting point too that I don't want us to take for granted, and quite frankly, I feel like it's often overlooked just given the focus of digital these days, which is, everything is transparent and it's on a website, and what's there is what you are using to determine whether or not you are going to click the buy button or not. And make no mistake about it, the rate of adoption of self-service technology, specifically in B2B, is accelerating by the day. That being said, we're still talking only about the mid-teens in terms of percent of overall revenue going through self-service channels. And so the vast majority of ordering still happens in some form of human-to-human interaction, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's via technology. And so what we often find is that there are strategies to produce a price point, kind of the quote-unquote take it or leave it price, the price that's on the website.
Yeah.
But there are also strategies in place to produce a range of price points, or as we like to call it, a price envelope, when a purchase is being negotiated. And so what our technology also does, beyond providing prices, it also provides the tools and mechanisms for B2B sellers to engage with their buyers to actually complete the transaction, to go through the entire quoting and negotiation process. And what we do is we show the seller a range. Here's the floor, here's a target price point, and here's an expert price point. And what we do is, it's hard being a B2B salesperson and trusting just, what could be perceived as black box technology. So in that envelope, we also explain to that person why they're seeing those prices. Companies that fit in this industry, in this geography, that use this product this way, that buy in these volumes, tend to fall right in this range. That's why we're recommending this particular price point for you. But it's different. It's different when you're negotiating versus, when you're putting a price on a website.
It's quite interesting. Okay, Marshall, your turn.
I was just being clever. I was going to say it's got to be strange as a salesperson knowing that the list price of your product is the one price that no one will ever actually pay. Because it's like your pet's name. Whatever you name your pet, you're never calling them that again. It's going to be some variation.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing, I was just jumping in, was as I started in our pre-show chit-chat, that the governmental institutions, such as price bidding, and you are entering, and this is very much the envelope, the classical envelope. You make your bid for buying an autobahn or part of a construction or for an officially requested skyscraper housing or whatsoever project. And then it comes to the point, these pricing agencies, for instance, when they sold mobile Wi-Fi frequencies and all that. Is this something you are in as well?
Less so on the latter example, but when you think about like project-based work, we're absolutely in that world. Whether it is pure services, whether it was products and services. And what's really interesting is where optimization can play a really interesting role is optimizing the basket of the goods. Up until this point in the conversation, we've been talking about setting a price. But what if you're dealing with, say, a combination of 20 different products and services? Well, as a business, you might be okay offering one of those things at a much lower price point, maybe even negative margin, if it's going to help you close the business and there's something else in that basket of goods and services where you can recuperate that margin. And so, whether you want to have loss leader products, whether you want to have a leader or follower strategy relative to competitive offerings out in the marketplace, it can be incredibly academic, and it can be incredibly focused on the list price and how you price that particular product. But when you think about winning and competing in the market and what's most important, is it conversion? Is it maximizing revenue? Is it maximizing profitability? There are so many levers at your disposal when setting your pricing strategy, both for individual products and for baskets of goods, that there's no way that humans alone can do this work, and there's no way that machines alone can do this work. It has to be, a good collaboration between the two.
To be very honest, I like to make a joke on the remark of the aircraft prices. These days, you can buy cheap Russian aircrafts and the ones from Boeing, still, those which are either grounded or one has doubt that they can fly. So they are bargains. But the other thing is to see it from software perspective. If you see all, which is very comparable to your pricing strategy you just showed, what is in, what is no longer in, the free drinks, the free luggage. If you look into software pricing, for instance, for a CRM landscape, and you go for the marketing automation solutions, and I have suddenly 5 or 6 in my mind, everybody is playing around with the customer, such as an onboarding fee, an offboarding fee, a migration fee, all that shit, which is at the end of the day making you really getting into trouble to do a fair comparison. And this is a
fair comparison from a vendor point of view who wants to be comparable.
Nobody wants to be comparable, but this is exactly the point. How does, to the advantage of the buyer, one gets a certain transparency through consultancy or through technical support into that jungle?
Yeah, it's difficult, right? So that's kind of the other side of the equation. So there's absolutely pricing components of that, but a lot of it's on the packaging side. So you can kind of think of the 4 Ps in terms of, the price, the product, or the package, how it's promoted, and where it shows up, or the place. And so the packaging piece of it, if I were to put my Forrester hat back on, I could wax poetic about my gripes with software and how software is being priced. I think the advent of SaaS, falsely told us that things were going to get more simple, and I would argue they did for a period of time. But all of the things you had mentioned, whether it's implementation fees, whether it's support services, whether it's now paying for things like a customer support manager, enablement, office hours, there's so many different services that businesses try to lump in. And quite frankly, I think the companies that embrace those kinds of strategies are ultimately going to be the ones that suffer the most pain because of it. businesses on the buy side, you're still looking for simplicity. You're still looking for transparency. And software companies today are just trying to game the system and tell you one thing and do another.
I'm glad you brought up. We're going to have to get signs or something. But I am glad that you. I'm glad. There you go. I'm glad you brought.
Or
up,
I could just mute Ralph.
No. I'm glad you brought up SaaS specifically, and the subscription economy that is built around it. I am wondering how that has changed and complicated things. Pricing. When I think pricing, the first thing that comes to mind is the price of a good or a service. It's a point in time and space. It's one price, whatever the quote is. Subscription, you make the quote, and then you're paying that every month for a while. How do you set that price? How do you change it? How has that affected your life?
In more ways than I could care to count. What I'll say is the move towards the subscription economy, I think, was so well intentioned, but over the past, specifically 10 years or so, is so riddled with flaws. So the intention, let's talk about the intention. The intention was to price a product or now service based on something that was directly correlated to the value that the end user gets out of it.
Yeah.
Where it's gone wrong is companies have failed miserably to define, measure, and report out on exactly what that value is. Give you a case in point. I used to cover the CRM market at Forrester. The pricing model of per user per month, I think, is the poster child for flawed pricing models. And the point being is, if you hire a new salesperson, you have an entire stack of technology for said salesperson that is priced on a per user per month basis. The fact that they have those technologies has no bearing whatsoever on whether or not they will be a successful salesperson.
Yeah.
But the price you pay for them is predicated on that. And so where I think we're going to see a massive revolt over the coming years is on the buy side, you'll see more power on the buy side in terms of kind of dictating or driving or shaping the future of these specific metrics that are adhered to in a subscription. And so if the metric that you're pricing the solution for me, I cannot map to the value that I'm getting out of it, I'm going to go elsewhere. And I'm going to pay for things more in the form of utility. And Marshall, to that point, I saw the wave start to happen. And the wave is more around the utility and the value. There will be peaks and troughs. And we've now come to expect that, just like Netflix, you pay your X amount per month and that stays flat, but value doesn't stay flat. And so if you're paying for something based on consumption and based on a metric that's attributable to value, yeah, you're going to see some lumpiness in there, but it's going to be more beneficial for the buyer.
I follow the suggestion and the question, such as I answered earlier. Oh no, I asked earlier if you are in the German-speaking territories as an active vendor. Question one.
Yes, we certainly are. Yep. So
Good.
We operate globally, but we've got strong presences in North America and strong presences in Europe and in Asia Pacific. In Europe, we really focus on the DACH region in particular, but also Western Europe.
So you probably are serving Idealo, Check24, or some of these consumer-driven platforms? Question.
I would say indirectly. So not those platforms specifically, but there are suppliers and manufacturers whose products and prices show up there. And similar to the US, where we've got similar websites and marketplaces and things of that nature, I would say one of the things that we're seeing as becoming more and more pervasive is we always talk about the divide of B2B and B2C or B2B2C, depending on how your product makes its way to market. but we're seeing a large number of our customers who traditionally operate in a B2B capacity also operate in a B2C capacity. So one in the food and consumable space has actually started selling their products on Amazon B2C. And they've been able to realize significantly higher margins than they would have ever expected for, because they trialed this out. Similarly, we have an auto parts retailer here in North America that you could go in off the street and buy air filters and oil for your vehicle, so long as we're still driving internal combustion engine vehicles. But what they also do is they support two different classifications of B2B buyers. Your large global brands, your major, Sullivan tires and things like that. And they also support your mom and pop mechanic shops. And so what's really interesting about this dynamic, I promise there's a payoff here, is that a company that operates in those kinds of capacities, they need to be aware of pricing everywhere. So if I'm a major B2B customer and I can walk into one of your stores off the street and buy a product that I normally purchase at a lower price point than what I've agreed to, that's going to be a problem. So you have to have a holistic solution that not only looks at your price points across all of your channels, but also looks at your price points across all of your routes to market. Because if I offer promotion for B2C, that better drive down my B2B pricing until that promotion goes away.
And do you serve already certain software vendors in the world, or dedicatedly, and you are allowed to name them?
We certainly service a number of software vendors. Off the top of my head, whether or not
Did
we
you
can
just
name
ask
them.
him if he has customers?
Well, we do a lot.
Are you an actual business, John?
We are
need to
an
know.
actual business. A lot of our business has kind of grown up in, I would say, B2B distribution because of the amount of price volatility.
Yeah.
In the early 2010s, we acquired a solution out of France called Chameleon as a configure price quote solution. So not only is it a solution that allows B2B businesses to quote to their customers, but it actually has a really sophisticated configuration engine as well. So we can service, industrial equipment manufacturers, for example, or folks in the automotive space where product configuration and compatibility is at an all-time high. But Marshall, to your point about subscriptions, we've seen software companies really drive that trend, but now we see a lot of other companies, a lot of manufacturers start to sell their products as services and embrace subscription models as well. So we have full support in our platform for the ability to create and define subscription plans and all of the kind of variants and components that go along with it. And as a result of that, we do work with a lot of software vendors, many of whom are household names in, say, the space of tax management or e-commerce or marketing automation as customers of ours.
So you will not name a brand so that we can have real fun. But what I was digging into is that I found it quite tricky these days. It's 5-6 years ago when Sage was still a name in the market and had some customers which are gone to nowhere land. They had a very fair market intelligence move, such as they compared to be more beneficial to their partner network and their ecosystem all of the prices of all competitive vendors to deliver to their partner ecosystem more value and to sharpen the value they deliver to the end customers.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this a smart idea, but a lot of work.
It can be a lot of work. I will say we have plenty of customers doing maybe not the same thing, but very similar things. So for instance, in the space of food and consumables, most manufacturers of food products, beverages, things of that nature, sell through distribution. Yeah. But what's driving a lot of their price points is not actually how the distributor purchases, but actually how the end consumer purchases. And so they gather a lot of market intelligence. They gather a lot of consumer sentiment. They subscribe to data feeds, that show customers' willingness to pay kind of at the point of sale. And so because they have that information from a manufacturing standpoint, they can set their prices, but they also provide guidance and counsel to their distribution partners to help their distribution partners make more margin in their markets. And subsequently, that value starts to go from the end consumer all the way back up the chain to the manufacturer. So they're not just a supplier of the actual products, but they're a supplier of insights that creates a win-win dynamic for both themselves and their distribution partners.
I just wanted to play back one of the remarks from Stephen, which I find quite interesting. And also I had a social post from Brand Leary 2 days ago when they were talking about petrol prices in the US. I couldn't hold laughter. You get 4 liters for that price, and we nearly pay the same amount roughly for 1. Yeah. So if you are complaining about that you pay $4 for 4 liters, we have to pay a lot more, nearly the double for the same amount. And we should weep and cry and shout and try to get some people like that. Yeah.
Okay, being Germans, we are anyways good at weeping and crying, but
we
That's your argument.
genetic.
You don't
German
have to drive as far.
Yeah,
But-
we still have an mobile industry which has certain rules and ideas on how the future might work without electro, but we will see. So next big thing to come around is either we find fuels which keep the old cars up and running, which are environmental friendly, and that would be a next interesting perspective of pricing. What would be an interesting opportunity for you to find a fair price for a liter of petrol in the US and in Europe? Could you assist there?
Oh, we certainly could, and we do. So of the global oil majors, I want to say 3 or 4 of the top 5 are currently Pro customers. Now, they all have different aspects of their business, everywhere from the crude oil through refinement, to fuels versus lubricants and things of that nature. So they all use the technology in various different ways. And so, yeah, we absolutely do play a role there. And what's interesting too is, given our pedigree in artificial intelligence, we also have capabilities of our platform as well that handle forecasting, that help those businesses try to get to better forecasting for their production, right? So their prices are largely constrained based on the amount of supply they have on hand at a given time. And what we saw through the pandemic and kind of the macroeconomic environment is that demand had slowed down, so supply had kind of come down. Demand's increasing now, supply is trying to catch back up, and there are other kind of geopolitical implications as to why supply has had a harder time catching up. But yeah, looking at that, how much should you produce in order to capitalize on a market dynamic that has not yet shown itself, is something that we help our oil and gas customers with routinely.
Yeah.
Putting that into a simpler, not intercontinental example, I had it a little with Steve a little earlier. So he in his own area sees, when he goes to his golf course, same brand, same type of fuel, difference between $4 and $3.30. I in my area, well, I'm happy if I see a 4 in front of the price. How is that explained in terms of pricing strategies?
Well, a lot
So
of those
what are some levers that are used here?
Yeah, what's interesting is a lot of those companies will actually do competitive intelligence down to the price at individual pumps. And so, there are consumer solutions out there that help you figure out what the best price for fuel is in your area. But they'll look at a whole host of factors. Of course, there's the local and federal government regulations. And, for those of us who live in higher tax states, one of the things that gets taxed pretty heavily is fuel, whether it's the environmental impact or some other reason. But the other part of it is who the consumer is and where they're purchasing. And so it's no surprise that you tend to see higher priced fuel at the pump in wealthier neighborhoods. And
Yeah.
so they'll go all the way down to that level. And of course, they need to abstract that up and roll it up because of the role they play in the value chain. But having the visibility into the price points all the way down to the end consumer is what allows them to set their price points effectively at point of production and distribution.
And
Now, we
where
had it
you're paying
before.
for it is significant. John, I will guess that you've been to New Jersey at least once in your life.
Don't even get to pump my own gas in New Jersey.
Yeah, and going, depending on which side of the highway you're driving on, the prices are significantly different.
Yep.
Whether you're coming into the state or going out, because of whether you're paying someone else to pump your gas, different taxes, the opportunity cost of when you're going to be able to fill up again. It was always very interesting to me to wonder how did they price that?
Yeah, easy example for everyone is you tend to find higher prices at the pump right off of the highway because people are running out of fuel, they need to stop quickly. Versus something that's further away from the highway, and it can be to the tune of at least in today's day and age, 30 to 50 cents per gallon.
Yeah, easily. Yeah.
Now, we had it a bit earlier, the terms of fair price and price for value. How does that get together with this type of pricing strategies?
Yeah, the pricing and price per value and willingness to pay is a really interesting topic, and it's one that we actually spend a lot of time thinking about. And so for those who aren't familiar with Pros, we actually have on staff full-time employees, several dozen data scientists that are constantly looking at the different trends that are going on in our different customers' respective markets. And so everything from, what you see with regards to Moore's Law and computational power, the price points for electrical components and things of that nature, right? So, the price point is at its highest when the product first comes out and then goes down over time in preparation for a new product to take its place. What's interesting is if you kind of do a compare and contrast that with, let's say, automotive parts. Well, automotive parts, if I were to buy, let's say, a cabin air filter for a 2020 Toyota Camry, that price is actually going to be a lot cheaper than buying a similar air filter for, let's say, a 1970 Pontiac GTO. Because there's fewer of those cars that require those components, and everything really changes. But what's really interesting is most of the pricing market has evolved in such a way where those of us that offer intelligent solutions that leverage AI will focus on a segmentation-based model. We'll gather in all this data and we'll segment customers and products and determine willingness to pay for each of those combinations. And one of the really cool things that we've been working on and have now is actually models that leverage neural networks and don't require any sort of segmentation. So we can even get down to the point of, what are the key attributes of said product? And how do those individual attributes of a product actually influence someone's likelihood to purchase and willingness to pay? So, for instance, if it's one of those products and a core component of it's made sustainably, is that a key driver? Or if you are buying, let's say, a configurable product, which of the attributes in that configuration has the highest likelihood to drive price variability, and which ones don't matter so much? And so we can even do that today without needing to go through every customer and handle individual customer segmentation.
Now, always interesting for me, at least, topic is that there are lots of vendors, and don't get me wrong here, yeah, that support vendors of something in optimizing price, which invariably leads to maximizing kind of the price. Because they have their stakeholders and shareholders as well who are interested in profitability, which is all fair and nice. What can the other side in B2B and B2C, probably more interesting in B2C, what can the other side, the customer side, do? What tools do they have for price optimization?
Well, let me start with the kind of initial thesis there of prices going up. I would say organizations that are most sophisticated will actually leverage technologies like ours on both sides of their business. So not just the sales side, but also the buy side. So if I'm, a business today operating in the current macroeconomic environment where, compared to, let's say 3 years ago where, growing top line revenue was the number one metric, and now that's probably fallen to number 2 or number 3 in favor of things like profitability and free cash flow. In that regard, actually, let me take a step back. So where that's changing and you're focusing on things now on margin, if I can get more intelligent with how I purchase as a business, so maybe I'm a manufacturer, but I require these components from a different supplier. If I can get more intelligent in my negotiation with that supplier, I can drive down my cost side. And if I drive down my cost side and my price point from the sales side stays the same, my margin still goes up. So I don't think that it always needs to go up. And quite frankly, whether you want to call this a recession or not, it's a down market. Customers are going to be more sensitive. There's going to be more elasticity in their willingness to purchase. And so you can't just always raise the price because that's what seems convenient to you. You have to be intelligent with your business. And there might be certain products where they're more inelastic and you can do that. But it's about balancing everything across your entire portfolio and doing so both from the buy side, but also the sell side.
Okay, this covers the businesses. So means there, in terms of pros, there's probably a module that serves that side as well.
Sure.
So now,
so the consumer side.
Look at the small business that can't do that.
Yep.
What would be smart strategies for them to be able to live what the advent of social media promised, which is power back to the customer, which is another misconception in my eyes, because it didn't happen.
Yeah, we could probably have a whole conversation as to how much power the customer actually does have.
Right.
You're
but
making
that
me
being
sad.
Go ahead.
You're making me sad.
But that being said, if you're a smaller business, what can you do? So if you are a smaller business and you are manufacturing products, it kind of goes back to the age-old question: is what makes your product different? And anchor on those things. If you are a distributor, I think the same forces that are working against you are also working for you, which is greater transparency. The ability for, let's say, a distributor to maybe switch suppliers, of the products that they're selling, is at an all-time high compared to where it was. So if I kind of rewind the clock back to when my father still owned his business, he was pretty much locked into the same 2 to 3 manufacturers of products. It's because the barriers to entry in entering one of those commercial arrangements was just so high. And to do that all over again was something that most small businesses would never entertain. But companies like those that he sold the products of, see a very long tail in those small businesses. Small businesses rule the world. And so, the having lower barriers to entry for one of those businesses to switch manufacturers or suppliers of the products they sell, that being so low, it does give them back the power. It's just, really anchoring on the willingness to explore those avenues. And it does take some work. But if you show that you're willing to do it, you can get a little bit more leverage in the hands of your commercial negotiations with your suppliers.
So it's boiling down to choice.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Vote with your wallet.
Yeah. So, okay, this is almost a perfect closing word, almost. But the semi-god of asking the question for famous last words is actually Ralph. Means we should have given Marshall the opportunity.
Me?
Yeah.
So, the only thing I had was another question
there
for John.
Are.
Yeah. I was something that we discussed while we were preparing for the show briefly. I was wondering if there is a particularly notable example of the butterfly effect that you've seen in pricing. A seemingly minor shift in an unrelated area that had a really outsized effect?
Yeah, it's seemingly unrelated. That's a tough one, but I would say one of the things that I found really interesting was, and maybe it had less of an effect on the actual price point and more an effect on the ability to sell. But if you look at what has happened with regards to COVID, and specifically, the shutdown of a lot of production around things like semiconductors, look at Taiwan, TSMC, for example, and the production that they provide to larger manufacturers, companies like AMD, in producing chips and CPUs and GPUs, things of that nature. One of the really interesting examples of that is it slowed down the supply chain to such a degree where you could walk into an automotive dealership in the US and see not a single vehicle of the current model year. I recently brought my Audi A4 in, not recently, maybe about 7 or 8 months ago, brought my Audi A4 in for a recall. And while I was there, I was saying, I wonder what the new stuff looks like. I haven't checked them out in a couple of years. And so I walked up from the service center to the dealership floor, not a single current model year. In fact, the most recent model year car they had to show was a 2019. All because automotive manufacturing was reliant on these chips to power the operating system of these cars, to power, self-driving and things of that nature. And it's so remarkable that, you look at someone like Elon Musk and you look at Tesla, they actually had rewritten the software of those cars to support different hardware. And they substituted that hardware just so they could deliver vehicles during the pandemic. And so I'm not sure if that one is disconnected enough for you, but I find that to be a really interesting example.
I think it's a great story. So that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
Cool.
Famous last words. Done.
Done and dusted.
Ta-da-da.
The asker of great questions to the answerer of great questions.
Hopefully, great answers.
With even better answers. Thanks, John, for being with us. This was not only fun but also very enlightening, actually.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, all of us, by virtue of being buyers and sellers, think we are price experts, but we aren't, right?
I don't know. I think after today, you can claim that.
John, you helped us to brighten up, shape our views and perspectives, and I found it very interesting, honestly, as it gave some orientation in areas such as don't be surprised. We are everywhere where you don't suspect us.
Yeah. Okay, I am putting price expert on my resume and naming you as a reference, John. So
have them call me.
You're on the hook,
call
bro.
me.
Thank you very much for joining us today. This has been great.
Thank you.
That was cool. Thank you.
And also thanks to everybody who is still in. See you. Bye. See you next week.